From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. The Iranian supertanker, formerly known as Grace 1, has left Gibraltar after local authorities rejected the United States' latest request not to release it. The tanker was seized by British Marines back on July 4th on suspicions of violating EU sanctions by delivering oil to Syria. Earlier on Sunday, the ship was reflagged to Iran's flag and changed its name to Adrian Daria 1 before heading into the Mediterranean bound for Greece. The Iranian government says the decision by Gibraltar shows that U.S. sanctions against Iran are illegal and without effect. And it insisted there was no connection with the British oil tanker detained in the Strait of Hormuz.
There is no specific relation between these two ships, Stena Impero and Adrian Daria 1. We are glad that our stance about the unlawful and illegal seizure of our tanker has been proven. Regarding the release of the law-breaking British tanker Stena Impero, we have to wait for the court's ruling. This tanker has committed 2 to 3 nautical violations that are being investigated. We hope that these investigations will finish as soon as possible and a verdict will be issued. And if the verdict orders its release, it can continue to sail on its path.
We spoke to Ahmed Caballo, a Sudanese journalist who was in Gibraltar, reporting for Press TV as the Supreme Court decided to release the tanker.
I arrived for the court at 10:30 a.m. local time, and the US Department of Justice put in a request at 1:36 a.m. The Attorney General then delayed the proceedings and said we would reconvene at 4 p.m. And everyone outside the court just assumed that the US would get its way, particularly because of the precarious position the UK is in with leaving the European Union and the prospect of a no-deal Brexit. However, at 4:30 p.m. local time, Gibraltar time, to our surprise, the tanker was ordered to be released, and it was very embarrassing for US officials who were talking about the tanker as if the court had already made its decision in their favor. Now, on Friday, the day after the decision, the US has put in this request, an arrest warrant, based on 3 things. It claims that it was violating the Emergency Economic Powers Act, which is obviously the unilateral sanctions that the United States placed on Iran following their retreat from the JCPOA agreement. Bank fraud, because they believe that the sales of the oil tanker would be in American markets and American financial systems. Money laundering. And then the third thing was terrorism, because the US obviously designates the Islamic Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. Now, everybody that's looked at these charges feel like they're kind of fake charges as a way for the US to save face, because it was very publicly embarrassed by the decision made by the chief minister and the Gibraltar officials on Thursday afternoon.
We're talking about 2.1 million barrels of oil. Did you get a sense of what kind of effects these sorts of sanctions have on the people in those 2 countries?
Yeah, I mean, the sanctions have a terrible effect. And it doesn't just have an effect on the Iranian people, doesn't just have an effect on the Venezuelan people, but it also has an effect on the US citizens themselves. I was reading a story just yesterday about an American citizen that wanted to go to Cuba to have treatment for his lung cancer, but was barred, and he had to go there illegally to get treatment. So US citizens themselves are suffering under sanctions. And the thing that annoys me the most is the US administration tries to pretend that it's on the side of the Iranian people and on the side of the Venezuelan government. Now, whatever you think of the Venezuelan government or of the Iranian government, the sanctions don't affect them. It affects the people on the ground, the working class, the people that are struggling to get in medicines to their hospitals.
27 miners from the Open Arms Humanitarian Rescue ship have been transferred from the Italian island of Lampedusa to the mainland. More than 100 people still remain on board the ship, which is blocked at sea. It has been reported that Spain and Italy have reached a deal for the remaining migrants to be transferred to the Spanish port of Mallorca. However, Open Arms has described the decision as incomprehensible due to the deteriorating conditions on the ship and their proximity to Lampedusa.
It is the 18th day of suffering, without answers for more than 100 people who, after arriving in safe waters, need to be brought to land. But instead, they are still waiting with no change in their circumstance. This is a useless exercise, because sooner or later they need to come off that ship, so every extra day is like an extension of a torture.
The leader of the opposition Labour Party in Britain, Jeremy Corbyn, has said that an early general election can end the crisis over Brexit. He defended his plan for a vote of no confidence in the government and a brief caretaker government led by himself. Corbyn was speaking after a leaked government document warned of shortages in a no-deal Brexit.
Labour believes the decision on how to resolve the Brexit crisis must go back to the people. And if there is a general election this autumn, Labour will commit to holding a public vote to give voters the final say with credible options on both sides, including the option to remain. 3 years of Tory failure on Brexit have caused opinions to harden to such a degree that I believe no outcome will now have legitimacy without the people's endorsement.
The Assembly of Caribbean Peoples continues in Trinidad and Tobago. It has movements from
No more Trump! 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 Thank you. Trump! No more 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 Trump! Thank you.
And Sunday's session of the Caribbean Festival of Arts, Carifesta, wrapped up with singers from Antigua and Trinidad and Tobago. The Trinidadian Nayla Blackman and Antiguan Claudette C.P. Peters are both singers of the soca genre, which combines the sound of calypso with electronic percussion and Indian musical instruments. The day also saw the performance of artists from Jamaica, Curaçao, Suriname, and Guyana. The festival includes food, music, visual art, and discussion on topics such as how Caribbean culture can be leveraged to boost economies as well as to boost quality of life. Coming up, another social leader has been murdered in Colombia. Don't go away. Welcome back. 4 people have been killed and several were left injured after clashes between fans of rival football clubs in the Honduran capital of Tegucigalpa. The violence broke out inside and near the city's national stadium ahead of a scheduled match between the Olimpia and Motagua clubs. It was reported that the violence started when Olimpia supporters attacked the Motagua team and its bus with stones and sticks. The riots also caused a stampede, causing the police to fire tear gas to disperse fans from both sides.
Look how they've left him. I don't want to look at him like that. Nobody's going to replace him. No one is going to give him back to me. I'm left with this great pain. It's very difficult for me. I don't want to see him like this. How they have left him for me. But my God, He can do anything and He will have His justice. I don't know how or why, but God is good. He will give me wisdom and He will help me with this pain that I have.
Another community leader has been killed in Colombia. The body of Luis Caldera Villamizar was found in the Cauca River on Sunday morning. Caldera was reported missing 15 days ago in the town of San Jacinto del Cauca. He was the head of the Association of Community Action Boards in his municipality and a candidate for the town council. Since the peace deal was signed in 2016, more than 620 community leaders have been killed in Colombia. Our correspondent José Manuel Jiménez from Bogotá has more about the case.
Saludos para ustedes. Efectivamente, en horas de la mañana.
Chiboria's community leader Luis Caldera Villamizar was recovered from the river Cauca near the town of San Jacinto del Cauca in the department of Bolívar. Field workers found the body floating with the legs and hands tied together and the signs of torture. Authorities have already launched an investigation into the case and are expected to deliver an initial report on the possible reason behind his murder. Caldera was also part of the political party and a candidate for the town council. His party has commented on his death so far.
That was José Manuel Jiménez from Colombia. And Colombian Senator and former presidential candidate Gustavo Petro has called on President Iván Duque to take more action to ensure the well-being of displaced citizens. Petro met with a group of Colombian refugees in France who were evicted by French authorities from the places they occupied. He says the government of Duque has the obligation to work with France to ensure safe housing for Colombian and other Latin American refugees fleeing war, violence, and poverty. Now we head to Nicaragua for a look at the impact which gender equality measures have had in the Sandinista-governed country.
It's a well-known fact that the countries that make up the northern triangle of Central America, Honduras, El Salvador and Guatemala, have some of the highest homicide rates in the world and are suffering from a migration phenomenon as people flee in search of a better life. In the face of these issues, political activists in Nicaragua held a forum focusing on women's issues and on preserving peace in the region. Dorothea Granada was born in the US but has been living in Nicaragua since the 1980s and is a director of an organisation that promotes women's rights from health to safety and empowerment.
In every Latin American country, women come second. We are second-class citizens. In Nicaragua, since the Sandinista revolution was victorious, every year we have more laws in support of women.
Women's empowerment can be seen and felt, says Carmen, whose life changed 7 years ago. She used to be a homemaker, but now she owns her own food business. She's part of 133,000 women who are part of cooperatives promoted by the Sandinista government that help them start their own businesses.
They give us plenty of help, starting from loans. There's no stealing here. This is great help for us women to get ahead. But we need to set our own goals and put in work, because if we're not determined to get ahead, then we won't.
At this gathering, the main topics discussed are the restitution of women's rights and globally recognised government programmes that have pushed it to be one of the countries with the highest rate of gender equality.
I think the role of a woman in Nicaragua can be seen from various angles. I prefer to look at it from a quality standpoint, because often women are part of a political system, but they don't have power to effect change. They cannot make decisions, and that's what's important. That empowers women and helps them move ahead. This is the sort of progress that has been made in Nicaragua. Women have been truly empowered.
According to the UN, 80% of the victims of people trafficking in Central America are women. As such, The Sandinista government has announced that they are working on legislation to punish crimes against the dignity of women.
Peru's women's rights movement demonstrated in Lima on Saturday to condemn gender-based violence. Protesters from the Ni Una Menos group were escorted by police as the group stopped outside the nation's Supreme Court. The demonstration was sparked by figures published by the Women's Ministry, showing that 103 women were killed in acts of gender-based violence so far in the year. Bolivia's President Evo Morales joined candidates of the movement towards socialism, known as the MAS, on a cycling caravan. They toured 4 municipalities of Cochabamba as part of his campaign ahead of the October 20th election. President Morales was accompanied by the governor of the department, the president of the parliamentary brigade of the region, and Mayor Humberto Sanchez. Applause and chants of support could be heard as residents lined the route. Argentina has appointed a new finance minister after Nicolás Duhovny resigned in a reshuffle on Saturday. Hernán Lacunza takes over with the Argentinian economy in turmoil, following President Mauricio Macri's defeat in the primary elections a week ago. The peso and the Argentinian stocks plunged last week. The president cut VAT and other taxes in a bid to win back voters, but the measures have cast doubt over Argentina's deal with the IMF, and consumers say they have had no effect on prices.
After the run on the peso following the elections, some producers stopped selling because of the uncertainty. By Friday, the currency stabilized at 17.6% below its value the week before, and retailers put up their prices accordingly.
Milk, cheese, flour and oil. I did the shopping yesterday and it was really tough. I get the minimum pension and it's very difficult.
The peso has fallen and that means everything has gone up. For example, soft drinks and biscuits. Everything.
Medicines were also affected.
Since yesterday, we have been increasing the prices between 10 to 15%. And yes, people are feeling it. They ask and look for a cheaper alternative, but that's the way it is.
Tamiro sells farm produce.
Our costs have gone up 20%, but we haven't passed it on to the consumers yet, because we are selling very little, and if we put the price up, we'll sell nothing.
It's a chain, and this is our livelihood. If sales go down here, then my standard of living goes down, so, well, one thing feeds into another.
The government eliminated VAT on basic goods, which was at 10.5%. But consumers say this measure is not reflected in the prices they have to pay.
From what I remember of the history of this country, every time a measure is taken that's meant to benefit the people, the consumers and the businesses absorb the benefits and the prices never go down. When the peso has gone up, I never saw the prices go down to reflect that. And now the peso is falling, and I think the companies are just taking advantage of this.
In the shops, people say the government's measures to benefit Argentinian consumers have so far had no effect. But the price rises are already a reality.
After the break, Sudan's former President al-Bashir faces his first day of trial. Stay with us. Thank you for joining us again. Demonstrations in Indonesia's West Papua have continued as protesters demand an end to alleged racist abuse and physical mistreatment of students by police. Thousands of Papuans protested in the cities of Manokwari and Sorong, blocking streets by burning tires and tree branches. The protests were sparked by the detention of students in East Java. They were accused of bending a flagpole in front of the dormitory during Independence Day celebrations. The government has since pledged to begin an investigation into the incident.
The government regrets the burning of the Indonesian flag, which is under investigation in East Java province now. The incident was followed by negative statements and triggered violent actions in several areas in Papua and West Papua provinces that were disrupting the nation's unity.
Sudan's former president Omar al-Bashir has appeared in court for the first day of a corruption trial. Al-Bashir is accused of possessing foreign currency, corruption, and receiving gifts illegally. In June, prosecutors said a large sum of foreign currency had been found in grain sacks at his home. Al-Bashir was ousted in April after months of protests brought an end to his nearly 30 years in power. The trial comes as Sudan's military and protest leaders begin to implement a deal that is meant to pave the way for a civilian government. Burials have started to take place in Afghanistan after a bomb exploded at a wedding hall in Kabul, killing at least 63 people and wounding more than 180. The Islamic State group claimed responsibility for the attack. The blast happened on Saturday during a wedding ceremony when a suicide bomber blew himself up inside while another detonated a car. Assad. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's president has vowed to avenge the loss of civilian lives. The country held subdued Independence Day celebrations following Saturday's wedding attack in the capital.
Unfortunately, the enemies of our country are very coward and weak. They carried out a brutal terrorist attack on a wedding party. They targeted a completely civilian place and attacked our children and women. And in a brutal way, they shed the blood of our countrymen. We will avenge the mass killing and bloodshed of our innocent countrymen.
Protests are getting increasingly violent in Hong Kong. About 180 police officers have been injured by protesters, according to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government. They say that police officers' families are also intimidated and bullied. A notice from Hong Kong authorities said that unfortunately, violent protesters repeatedly carried out illegal acts during the last 2 months. Footage has circulated showing protesters destroying public property, throwing bricks and targeting police stations. And on Saturday, demonstrations were held in Hong Kong with calls for an end to violence and riots. Nearly 500,000 residents rallied in condemnation of the targeting of police and the support by US-based NGOs and local groups which are US-financed. And those protests reached Sydney, Australia, with demonstrators saying that much of the confrontation was taking place on the ground in Hong Kong were the result of the violent approach of the so-called pro-democracy rioters. They say that many Chinese students have actually voiced their opposition to the demonstrations.
There have been a lot of violence and violent protests in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong people have suffered from that, and we want to voice our call for the peace and order in Hong Kong. That's the purpose of this of today's rally.
Residents of Srinagar in Indian-occupied Kashmir took to the streets on Sunday, demanding freedom after New Delhi reimposed movement restrictions. Many of the protesters marched with their faces covered while chanting, "We want freedom." Indian authorities have said they lifted the movement restriction. However, major parts of the city are still blocked by police. Security forces have also put up barricades and used wires to block roads. A security lockdown has entered its 14th straight day after India stripped occupied Jammu and Kashmir of its semi-autonomous status. A massive fire has swept through a slum in the capital of Bangladesh, leaving more than 10,000 people homeless. No deaths have been reported so far, although several people were injured. According to officials, many homes in the Dhaka slum have plastic roofs, which help the flames to spread. An investigation is underway to discover the cause of this fire.
It's all burnt. We have nothing now. All our belongings and houses have been burnt. Whatever we had in our houses, we could not save. My belongings were worth about 500,000 taka. I had some gold ornaments and other clothes. All were burnt. What else can I say? I have nothing more to say.
Authorities in Egypt have defended renovation works at the historic Barron Palace in Cairo after the site's new look sparked mockery on social media. The Antiquities Minister has said the original color of the palace was obliterated by a layer of dirt, and with the renovations, the real color emerged. He said this in response to online mockeries that the new color is terrible. The Barron Palace was built between 1907 and 1911 by wealthy Belgian industrialist Edouard Entine. Icelanders have gathered to mourn the passing of Ökjökull, the first of the country's hundreds of glaciers to melt away due to climate change. Locals unveiled a plaque to indicate the loss, as scientists warn that some 400 other glaciers are expected to follow the same path. At the ceremony, Ireland's Prime Minister also explained that losing glaciers will likely affect the country's power grid in the future, as a big part of the country's renewable energy is produced in glacier rivers. And with that, we end our news brief, but you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
Discover the cultural diversity that defines a continent. The place where art and tradition are part of the same nucleus. Artistic expressions, values, passion, and more. Real life. Fridays, only on Telesur.
Esta es una historia bastante complicada, tiene muchos puntos oscuros.
Lo matan agentes del gobierno norteamericano.
Pues tuvieron que idear un plan maestro.
Ellos mismos se limpiaron las manos de sangre.
La versión que se ha dado no corresponde a la realidad. Y este fue.
Discover the cultural diversity that defines a continent. The place where art and tradition are part of the same nucleus. Artistic expressions, values, passion, and more. Real life. Fridays, only on Telesur.
And these are the headlines at this hour. The Iranian supertanker, formerly known as Grace 1, has left Gibraltar after local authorities rejected the United States' latest request not to release it. The tanker was seized by British Marines back on July 4th on suspicions of violating EU sanctions by delivering oil to Syria. The Iranian government says the decision by Gibraltar shows that U.S. sanctions against Iran are illegal and without effect. 27 miners from the Open Arms humanitarian rescue ship have been transferred from the Italian island of Lampedusa to the mainland. More than 100 people still remain on board the ship, which is blocked at sea. It has been reported that Spain and Italy have reached a deal for the remaining migrants to be transferred to the Spanish port of Mallorca. However, Open Arms has described the decision as incomprehensible due to the deteriorating conditions on the ship and their proximity to Lampedusa.
It is the 18th day of suffering, without answers for more than 100 people who, after arriving in safe waters, need to be brought to land. But instead, they are still waiting with no change in their circumstance. This is a useless exercise, because sooner or later they need to come off that ship, so every extra day is like an extension of a torture.
4 people have been killed and several were left injured after clashes between fans of rival football clubs in the Honduran capital, Tegucigalpa. The violence broke out inside and near the city's national stadium ahead of a scheduled match between the Olimpia and Motagua clubs. It was reported that the violence started when Olimpia supporters attacked the Motagua team bus with stones and sticks. The riots also caused an stampede, causing the police to fire tear gas to disperse fans from both sides. And Sunday's session of the Caribbean Festival of Arts, Carifesta, wrapped up with singers from Antigua and Trinidad and Tobago as well. The Trinidadian Nayla Blackman and Antiguan Claudette C.P. Peters are both singers of the soca genre, which combines the sound of calypso with electronic percussion and Indian musical instruments. The day also saw the performance of artists from Jamaica, Curaçao, Suriname, and Guyana. And those are the headlines at this hour. For these and more stories, you can check our website, telesurenglish.net.